You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. And as always, I apologize for all of my Hebrew pronunciation. I know I'm going to pronounce Hebrew words wrong, so instead of getting annoyed, I give you permission to laugh at how I say things. Today's topic is the Jewish Patriarchs. When we say patriarchs, we're talking about the big three: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Think of them as the founding fathers of Judaism, except instead of powdered wigs and quills, we've got tents, camels, and the occasional divine message. These guys aren't just figures in history, they're the starting lineup in the story of the Jewish people. Like any good superhero franchise, each patriarch has his own origin story, character quirks, and dramatic plot lines. And yes, they sometimes argue with God, which is pretty bold when you think about it. Let's dive into who they were and why their stories are still told thousands of years later. Abraham is the first patriarch, and definitely the headline act. Imagine God showing up one day saying, "Hey, leave everything you know, pack up your stuff, and I'll tell you the destination once you start driving." That's the level of faith Abraham had. He left behind his home, his culture, and his safety net because he believed in this new covenant with God. He's promised that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars, which is hilarious considering he and Sarah had 0 kids and were well past retirement age. Abraham is bold, he's faithful, but also incredibly human. He laughs at God's promises, argues to save the city of Sodom, and sometimes struggles with decisions. That mix of devotion and doubt makes him relatable. He's not some untouchable saint. He's more like the first person to say, "Yeah, I'll try this impossible thing and trust it'll work out." And that leap of faith becomes the foundation of the entire Jewish story. Isaac, the second patriarch, often feels like the overlooked middle child. He doesn't get the big dramatic moments like Abraham, and he doesn't stir the pot like Jacob. But Isaac is crucial because he keeps the story moving forward. His big claim to fame, of course, is nearly being sacrificed by his father Abraham. If you think your family has issues, imagine Thanksgiving dinner after that incident. But Isaac survives, marries Rebekah, and plays his part as the steady figure in the chain. He digs wells, raises a family, and preserves the covenant. Isaac shows us that not everyone in history needs to be flashy to be important. He represents stability, continuity, and trust. In a modern sense, if Abraham is the startup founder with wild vision, Isaac is the operations manager making sure payroll runs and the lights stay on. Without him, the whole enterprise doesn't move forward. His quieter role makes him easy to miss, but it's also what makes him indispensable. Now Jacob, he's the drama king of the bunch. From the very start, he's wrestling for attention, literally grabbing his twin brother Esau's heel at birth. His name even means trickster or heel grabber, and he lives up to it. Jacob tricks Esau out of his birthright, disguises himself to snag his father's blessing, and then runs away when things get heated. He spends years working for his uncle Laban, falls in love with Rachel, accidentally marries Leah, and ends up with 2 wives, 2 concubines, and 12 sons. That's not a family tree. It's an entire forest. But Jacob's turning point is the famous late-night wrestling match with a mysterious figure, often understood as God or an angel. Jacob refuses to give up until he gets a blessing, and in that moment he's given a new name, Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. That name becomes the identity of the Jewish people, showing that struggle itself is part of the faith journey. Together, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob form a trilogy of faith, continuity, and struggle. Abraham leaps into the unknown, Isaac quietly preserves what has begun, and Jacob wrestles his way into becoming a people. It's like 3 acts in a play, each essential to the bigger story. They show that the Jewish tradition isn't about one type of hero, but about a family evolving through generations. Their stories are more than personal dramas. They're archetypes. Abraham represents faith and vision. Isaac represents steadiness, and Jacob represents wrestling with identity. Every generation of Jews has gone through those cycles, starting fresh, preserving what came before, and struggling with who they are. These patriarchs aren't just ancient figures. They're mirrors. They remind us that doubt, conflict, and growth are not signs of weakness, but signs of being human in relationship with God and history. That's why their stories never fade. You'll often hear the patriarchs' names in Jewish prayer. In the Amidah, the central prayer recited 3 times a day, Jews begin with God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. It's like a roll call that connects worshipers to their ancestors. It's not just about remembering. It's about rooting identity in a long, unbroken story. Even in art, literature, and pop culture references, these 3 names show up as shorthand for faith, covenant, and heritage. Imagine Abraham as the visionary entrepreneur, Isaac as the loyal COO, and Jacob as the unpredictable creative director who constantly pushes boundaries. Their influence is everywhere, not because they were perfect, but because their lives were full of real struggles and messy choices. They remind us that faith is not a fairy tale. It's a story of ups, downs, mistakes, and persistence. That makes them more than legends. They become companions in the ongoing Jewish journey. But it's also worth asking the harder questions. Why this family? Why do their stories matter so much, even when they're filled with mistakes and conflicts? Jewish tradition doesn't give simple answers, but instead encourages questioning. Some see Abraham's story as proof that faith can transform a life. Others focus on his arguing with God as a model for moral courage. Isaac's quieter role has been read as weakness by some and as quiet resilience by others. Jacob's trickery sparks debate. Was it justified or just selfish? These layers are intentional. The patriarchs aren't cardboard cutouts. They're complex humans whose flaws make the story richer. The message isn't be perfect like them. It's wrestle with life like them. That wrestling between right and wrong, trust and doubt, boldness and humility is what Judaism has always been about. And that makes the patriarchs feel surprisingly modern. Now here's the thing. The patriarchs don't exist in isolation. Their wives, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, are equally essential to the story. They shape the family, make big decisions, and sometimes outsmart the men entirely. But they are so important, so central, that they deserve their own dedicated episode. So for today, we're focusing on the patriarchs while giving the matriarchs their due respect, with the promise that their stories will get the spotlight later. Just know this. Without the matriarchs, the patriarchs wouldn't be half as impactful. They balance the story and ensure the covenant moves forward. Their strength, wisdom, and actions are woven throughout the same story. But for now, we're sticking with the guys and saving the women's stories for another deep dive, where we can give them the full attention they absolutely deserve. Thinking about the patriarchs today means reflecting on legacy. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob weren't flawless heroes. They doubted, argued, and sometimes messed up, but they stayed in relationship with God. That's the real point. Judaism doesn't pretend that its founders were spotless. Instead, it highlights their humanity, showing that even with mistakes, people can build something lasting. If Abraham could take a leap without knowing the destination, Isaac could hold things steady, and Jacob could struggle his way into a new identity, then we too can live lives that matter, even with our flaws. That's comforting, especially in a world obsessed with perfection. The patriarchs show us that persistence is more powerful than perfection. And wrestling with big questions is not a failure, but a way of being Jewish. Their stories remind us that being chosen doesn't mean being flawless. It means being willing to show up and keep trying. So to wrap it up, the Jewish patriarchs are not dusty names from a textbook. They're vivid characters who laid the groundwork for the Jewish people. Abraham, the bold visionary. Isaac, the quiet bridge. Jacob, the wrestler with God. Each one adds a unique note to the symphony of Jewish tradition. Together, they embody faith, continuity, and struggle, themes that echo through Jewish life to this day. When you hear their names in prayer or study their stories, you're connecting to a lineage that stretches across thousands of years. And maybe the best way to picture them isn't just in the desert under the stars, but in a modern coffee shop, still debating, still questioning, still wrestling with God and with life. That's the beauty of their story. It's ancient, yet always alive. Thanks for listening. And remember, the patriarchs may be the headline today, but the matriarchs are waiting for their own star episode soon.